So I was hired out of graduate school to go to the University of California, Davis, and be a part of a change agent project that was to change the University of California, Davis from a campus of 2,000 students, 2,500 students to 1,800 students in a period of 2 years, and for it to be competitive with the most attractive campuses of the University of California um, university system. So I did that, and that's where my mentor helped me discover not only organizational development but consulting. And I then left there at his advice and went to Case and got my doctorate in organizational behavior at the Case OB um, program, and also attended the postgraduate program at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland at the same time. And I also got very lucky, and about 2 years after that, ended up getting my first corporate consulting job, which at the time was literally an impossibility because people just didn't hire Black people to work with heads of companies or uh, work in the boardrooms. And so I spent my life, for the most part, with three major practices. One being my spiritual practice, one being my business practice or working with corporations, and the other being the developer of what's now known as Gestalt OSD, which is a body of knowledge that was expanded off of Gestalt, existentialism, Buddhism, etc., but took all of that and moved it across multiple levels of system, which it had not been, which had not been done at that point of time. There were five of us that got together and did that, and that body of knowledge is pretty much at this point known worldwide. And um, I think a few years ago, somebody wrote in some book that it was the fifth most used frame of reference by OD practitioners around the world. Um, and the things that matter to me most up until this pandemic were the plight of the African American male and the privatization of water. But I am not an activist in relationship to those things, and they're not the things that I typically got hired to do or talk about. So I made a pledge to myself some 20 years ago that I would not give any public speech or presentation that I was paid for without telling people what really mattered to me, even though that was not why I was there to be with them or being paid to talk to them or whatever. And the thing with the African American male is that if I describe the African American male to you, as I have to people over the years, they say, "Oh, what animal is that? Is that animal on the endangered species list?" And I say, "No." And they say, "Oh, well, it should be." And I say, "Well, it's the African American male." And they go, "Oh." So there you go with that one. And the other one is that the privatization of water. I believe that everyone should have drinkable water within walking distance of their home. And we don't even have that in the US. And there's absolutely no reason that we can't actually do that as humanity for everybody. It would be a very simple thing to do if we were committed to actually making it happen. But since the pandemic, I think that the two things that matter most that I don't think we're giving significant attention to is that we have people who are starving, we have people who are hungry, we have people who can't put food on their plates for their families and children. And even though a lot is being done, it's not enough. And the second thing is, I don't think we have a clue, Janie, of the implication of the interruption to individual children, adolescent, and adult development by what we've had to do in terms of distancing ourselves, lack of physical touch, lack of people's being able to support people's personal growth and development that happens through their educational experiences. And we are going to pay for that around the world in ways that we haven't even imagined. We don't have a clue.
I completely agree that there's hasn't been enough of thought put into the transition that a lot of schools and places are making. They haven't considered what it means for people at home to be at home for this long. Um, I know that there's been a sharp uptick in abuse and domestic violence because a lot of kids and spouses that, had a reprieve going to school and work every day are now stuck at home with their abusers.
Yeah.
So I see that.
Yeah. So anyway, unless you have questions, that's me for the moment.
I do have questions.
Oh, I didn't tell you my relationship to AI,
Okay,
which you
go
have as
ahead.
part of your question. I should tell you that. My first corporate client was Toucheras of Canada. And as my professional career evolved, one of my specialties became succession planning. So I was asked by the head of Toucheras at one point. He said, "John, we're going to do something that we've never done before. We're going to change both of our top leaders at the same time. This is the chairperson of the board and the managing partner, who is the equivalent to like the president or CEO of a company." And he said, "We need to do that and have as few unintended consequences as possible. Figure out what we need to do and bring it to me." Now, this was 5 years before that was going to actually happen. And so I started working on it, and about every 6 months or so, I would take something to him, and he would say, "This will not work, and it won't do what I want it to do. Bring me something else." So we were coming up on the 3-year mark, and he said, "You're failing. You have not brought me anything yet. What are you doing?" And earlier I had told my wife about this, and she was at that point doing her dissertation on appreciative inquiry at Cleveland Clinic. And she said, "John, you should look at this appreciative inquiry thing." So I looked at it and I said, "Oh, it's Pollyannish bullshit." I said, "If I took this into my client, he'd throw me out of his office." So I went to her and I said, "I'm in deep trouble." She said, "What?" I said, "I haven't been able to find anything to take to Jim Miller yet." And I said, he told me that we got 3 months before something has to begin to take place if this thing is going to happen on time. She said, "I told you should look at appreciative inquiry." And I said, "I told you it's Pollyanna's bullshit." And she said, "Well, I'm going to tell you for the last time, and I'm not going to say anymore. You should take a look at it." So I looked at it and I said, "Oh my God, you folks," meaning she, Cooper Ryder, Suresh, and others that were considered the early developers of it. I said, "You're using this as an action research model." And I said, "That's not the power of this thing." I said, "The power of this thing is in people telling the stories. But you got them telling the stories to consultants or outside interveners. They should be telling the stories to each other, because that's what will basically begin to create this actual change or momentum in the organization that can't be stopped. And action research isn't doing that. You shouldn't be regurgitating these stories. The stories are the power of the intervention." And so I said, "Let's call up Cooper Ryder and get him over here and talk to him." So I called up Cooper Ryder, and he came over at the house, and I told him what I was thinking. He says, "Oh, Sean, you're working with consultants. You can't do appreciative inquiry with them." I said, "Why not?" He says, "They're trained to look at the negative. You would have to retrain those people in terms of how they think. How are you going to do that?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that." And he says, "Then you're going to fall on your ass." I said, "Well, I don't think so." I said, "I think I can uh, give people what they need to do this without going into some real retraining of who they are as professionals or how they think." And he said, "Well, I don't think you can do that." I said, "Well, just come along for the ride." I said, because I'm going to go forward with this if I get it approved by the head of the company. So I got it approved. Long story short, we did the intervention. It was an incredible success. We did it nationwide in Touche Ross in 26 offices across Canada. We involved all 350 of their partners in it. And 2 years later, after that study was done, Touche Ross was involved in a merger with Deloitte. And that merger was in 86 countries around the world. And in 85 of those countries, it was a takeover by Deloitte. It was a three-way merger between Tomatsu, Deloitte, and Touche. But in 84, because in Japan, it was a takeover by Tomatsu, but every place else it was a takeover by Deloitte, except in Canada. And in Canada, it turned into a reverse takeover. And they credited that to the work that they had done in relationship to appreciative inquiry. And here's the big thing. Guess what the major discovery that came out of that study was?
What?
Touche Ross had moved from number 7 in their business and industry. 7 was the absolute bottom, the dirt, the unwanted. They had moved from number 7 in their business and industry to number 1 in a period of 10 years. And they credited it, and it came out in the appreciative inquiry study, to love. And I had worked in that organization at that time for 15 years. I had never, ever heard anybody even mention the word love.
That's actually really cool. And that's great that you got David to go along with it and to see the big success. That's really awesome. Do you tell your wife thank you?
Every day. And it actually changed the way that they did appreciative inquiry. Their next appreciative inquiry study was done with the Red Cross. It's probably to this date the largest one that's ever been done in terms of the number of involvement of people. And they changed it and started having people interview each other instead of being interviewed by consultants or outside interveners.
The company in Canada, was that, would you say, your most successful collaborative change event that you have led?
I would say it was one of them, but not the.
Can you tell me about the most successful, in your opinion, that you've led?
Yes, I would say it was the merger process inside of Touche Ross that actually supported them becoming number 1 over a period of 10 years. We did 35 mergers in a period of 10 years. And every last one of them made the business case with the exception of one. And the only one that didn't make the business case was the one in which we didn't follow through on our protocol and format that we had for supporting the mergers, acquisitions, and takeovers. And after my client, Jim Miller, left Touche Ross, he had been the head of Touche Ross for 10 years, which was the maximum of the time that you could stay in that role. He left to take over Royal Trust, which was the richest financial institution in Canada. It's where people kept all of what they call the gray rinse money, the women whose husbands have died or whatever, and left them, and they're multimillionaires, billionaires, or whatever. That money was mostly invested through Royal Trust. And he sent me over there a month before he was to go take over to just see what the lay of the land was. And in a week's time, I told him, Royal Trust is getting ready to go bankrupt. And he said, that's not possible. And I said, well, it is. I'm halfway through talking to the 40 leaders. Every last one of them knows that it's about to go bankrupt. And actually, the analysts on the street even know that it's about to go bankrupt. It did go bankrupt, but Jim came over anyway and took over the presidency and basically dissolved Royal Trust through a merger that took place with Royal Bank And I then became the primary consultant to the merger between Royal Trust and Royal Bank, and ended up working with Royal Bank for probably about 6 or 7 years. So the merger work, I would say, is actually my greatest success, and also from a financial point, probably the financial engine for many years of my practice, because of how extensive it was and how many people were involved in it, and the result of it.
I'm actually surprised that the Two Straws wasn't your most successful change event. You would think that something that is so changing to the method itself would be your most successful. So I'm really surprised by your answer.
Well, I'll give you another perspective on it, because I could have said the Case Western Reserve Dental School, which was the first organization-wide change effort that I led after I finished my doctorate. And I went to the dental school to help them get accredited, because they had been told they were probably going to either lose their accreditation altogether or be put on probation. And I went there and convinced the dean at that point that I didn't know absolutely that they could get accredited, but I did know from my experience, awareness, knowledge, and skill that if somebody doesn't believe that you can make something happen, you definitely aren't going to make it happen. I said, so somebody has to say that this can happen. And he said, nobody in this organization can do that. I can't even do that. I said, then hire me. I'll come here and I'll stand up and say that that's going to happen. But you have to promise me that you're never going to challenge me or counter me in relationship to my saying that, even though I don't have a clue, but I know what the hell I'm talking about. And they got accredited, even though they shouldn't have gotten accredited. And not only did they get accredited, but the accrediting organization, the National Dental Association, changed their accrediting process on the basis of what we had done at Case Western Reserve to get them accredited.
Nice.
Now, the thing I say to you about why I didn't make that in the first is the dental school, in the great scheme of things, is, oh, by the way, later they became the #1 dental school in the country. But the dental school was a little bitty bucket to play in. But it gave me confidence that I could work with an organization and do that. So if you want to ask the one that had the most impact on who I am as a person, it's probably the dental school.
That one. Okay. I like both of those answers. I think they're both equally valid in the measure of success, because success to different people means different things. So successful to you as a person and successful to the organization that you're working with, they're both equally successful. But I'm glad you told me both experiences. I think they're both equally important. What advice do you have for someone that is looking to build their competencies and their mastery level of collaborative change, AI, and different OD interventions and methods?
Well, the first thing is don't ever attach your worth to what somebody's paying you. Nobody can pay you what you're worth, and your worth has nothing to do with what somebody is paying you. And I see so many individuals, consultants, particularly young people, doing that. And as much as possible, try to have your work attached to what you're interested in learning or learning about. When I told my spiritual teacher in 2000 that I was getting ready to stop my corporate work and retire, was the language I used, he said, you know, John, he said, there isn't anything but work. You should be careful about what you're leaving and what you're moving toward, because everything is work, and there isn't anything but work. If you're sitting on a rock, that's your work. If you're robbing banks, that's your work. You're meditating all day, that's your work. So pay attention to what you're leaving and what you're moving toward. Um, Took me 2 years to figure out what he was talking about. But one of the funny things with that is uh, I started this interview talking to you. I don't think it's on the tape, talking to you about that the big thing that changed in 2000 was that I could no longer uh, go to the restroom and think about somebody and send them a bill. And that stopped. That changed. But you remember that guy? I think his name was Willie something. He robbed banks, and they asked him, why do you rob banks? I mean, most bank robbers get caught, and he says it's because that's where the money is. So first thing I say to people is pay attention to what you want to learn and how you're spending your time, and make sure that it's in some way that matters to you and hopefully matters to something higher than you. The second thing is don't chase fads. I guarantee you they will all end, including AI as a fad. And early in my career, we created a counseling course, which today would be called coaching. And the company that we created it for wanted to give us a lot of money to take it and go on a road trip to teach everybody how to do this counseling, which was aimed at how do line managers work with people who come into their office with personal or organization or group problems or issues when they haven't been trained to deal with them in relationship to those kinds of things. So we put this little program together, and we said no to them, which they were outraged at. But we said, we'll create a self-instructional program for your people. And they said, you can't do that. We said, yes, we can. And they said, well, how are you going to do that? We said, well, just you fund it, we'll do it. So we created a self-instructional program, which they immediately said wouldn't work. And so we went up to Queens College with 20 of their people, and we set them up with video cameras and rooms and self-workbooks and whatnot. And we told them, we're going to go play tennis. We'll be on the tennis courts. If you get stuck in some way, call us, come get us. And other than that, we'll be back at the end of the week. And they went through the program and it worked, But I think if we had done that, it would have been chasing money, and it wouldn't have had anything to do with what was important to me or what was important to us from a learning perspective or the next thing that was important for our clients or for us.
So you didn't go on the tour?
No.
Okay.
No. We did make a grave error though, which was Betamax was around as the most prominent thing that people were using the tapes for recording in those days. But Betamax wasn't the issue. The issue was we designed this program to be used in their 26 offices across the country. And only one out of those 26 offices actually had a video recorder.
Gotta have the tools to succeed.
Talk about scanning your environment. It never occurred to us to even ask that question. We were hanging out on the edge of the newest technology. We just assumed, that these folks are going to have that.
Yeah.
So that would be the second thing. And the third thing, which in some way may be the most important, is connect yourself to significant others that are exhibiting in one way or another things that you want to learn about or can assist you and support you in becoming who you, even more than who you want to be, who you ought to be.
Do you say significant others as in just meaningful relationships within our lives, like colleagues, mentors, etc., or do you say specifically significant others as in romantic partners?
Well, It can be any of those. I actually wrote my dissertation on significant others as learning relationships. And in that, I define significant other as anybody who can demand your time and attention beyond the face-to-face relationship for any period of time. So the person who shortchanged you at the gas station could be your significant other for a period of time, because you're going to kvetch and complain. And if you don't figure out some way of either dealing with yourself or dealing with them in relationship to it, you're going to waste a bunch of your time and energy. However, everybody that shows up in front of you is a gift. And your task is to figure out what's the gift. So even the person who shortchanged you, they were a gift. Figure out what you're supposed to learn from it and then move on.
I definitely can agree with that. What is one thing that you wish you knew about OD when you were just starting out?
When I was given until I was given the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Organizational Development Network, I had never called myself or marketed myself as an OD consultant. And my reason for that was, as I said to them when I was accepting the award from them, and said, even though I have historically not done this, if any of you want to say publicly that I am an OD consultant, and anybody says that, I won't deny it. But what I said to them at the time is, I've been involved in what I consider some of the most creative, innovative, impactful OD projects, interventions in the world. And there's not a single one of them, if we had labeled it, marketed it, attempted to get it approved as an OD intervention, it would have been rejected, or we wouldn't have been able to do the work.
Do you think that that's because there is still a lack of knowledge about OD and what it is and what its implications are for organizations? Or do you think it's something else?
No, if you go back to the history of OD, OD started out by middle managers who were unhappy in organizations, and they began to organize themselves and began to attempt to change what the leaders were doing in the organization so that the organizations would be better for themselves as middle managers and better for everybody in the organizations. So OD started out with people who were what I today label as the lunatic fringe, or wanted to be lunatic fringe. They wanted to basically change the systems that they were a part of in ways that we talk about. Our purpose in the OSD Center is transforming humanity. In one sense, they wanted to transform organizations. But through the years, one of the things that happened was OD got connected, associated, that its primary value system was consensus decision making, which not only did most people not understand what consensus decision making was, they thought that it meant that everybody agrees, when actually it just meant that everybody got to give their voice. And most leaders weren't going to be in favor of consensus decision making. You know, I mean, it's basically almost an abdication of their power, giving their power away. I'm going to do that, even though they didn't say it. And so OD got itself into trouble in relationship to its espoused values. Now, the fact is, OD has never been able to agree ever about what its values are. I actually worked with a group. It wasn't led by Herb Shepherd, but Herb Shepherd was a primary teacher of mine. I was beyond mentors when I first met Herb, but he took me on as a client and a protege to some extent. And in the early years of my life and of my career until he died, I met with him once or twice a year, and I paid him for that time whatever I was charging my highest paid client. That was a deal between the two of us, which was significant. I started out, I was paying him $200 each visit, and he was making at that time, I think, about $2,000 per day, and the $200 was for a day with him. Toward the end of his life, he was charging something like $25,000 a day, and I was charging $2,000 a day. But we kept that agreement through that whole time. But
Significant others.
yeah, but I just participated in a thing called the Gathering of OD, whatever, the future of OD or whatever. It was a 3-year project to, um, again, attempt to come up with what are the values of OD. And by the way, he didn't lead the project. I forget the guy's name who led that project. We're trying to come up with uh, worldwide values for OD, but it was never agreed to. And some of the glitches were things like in the US, it's against the law to bribe people. And of course, you have these values that you, but at that point, if you looked at some of the Eastern companies, bribery was just a part of doing business. So they couldn't agree to a set of OD values that said you're going to do business without bribing people, and you won't exist. So there were things like that that were just pragmatic things that got in the way. In this new OD gathering, of people that came together 3 times over a period of 3 years, it was attempting to come up with a new set of values or alter the set of values in relationship to OD, and also come up with a definition of what OD was. And when we started doing that, I said, we haven't done this in all of these years. What makes us think that we're going to do it now? They did come up with an answer to those two questions, and that's available to you or other people who might be interested in it. However, I said at that time, at the beginning of it, if you Google OD, you come up with something like 50 different definitions. So there's never been any agreement about, even from us professionally, about what OD is as a field, as a profession, or as a practice. And what I would say to people is, when I was working with ODN and was on their board, I often tried to get, or actually it's one of my big failures in life, I tried to get that board to agree that we would define OD in relationship to the body of knowledge, the theory, the concepts, and the methods. And anybody who uses that, all we would do is define what's in and what's outside of that body of knowledge. And that anybody who used that body of knowledge could say that they're practicing OD. That didn't mean that they're a professional practitioner. But if you're a mother and you're using the theory and the concepts of OD in terms of the professional field, you're practicing OD to raise your kid. So what would I say to people? I would say to them what one of our first applied behavioral science teachers said, which is you need good theory, you need good as a person and as a professional, and you'll end up doing well no matter what you do, even if it's digging ditches. And that's what our OSD body of knowledge is about. It's all based on natural human process that can be applied across multiple levels of system. But because it's natural human process, everybody's doing everything that is in that body of knowledge, no matter who they are and no matter what they're doing. So if you learn about that body of knowledge, you're basically just learning about yourself and about other human beings and how to support them, centering themselves, grounding themselves, and ideally connecting themselves to the highest in everything that they do. And one of the new things that I'm saying in relationship to that is all of us need to strive toward having a worldview that our own behaviors and the behaviors of others are self-serving and whole-serving at the same time. And right now, even most of our OD theory, the way that people are using it is to be self-serving, whether that's at the individual level or the group level, and not self-serving and whole-serving at the same time, which is what we need to strive for if we aren't going to basically eradicate humanity, which we're working very hard to do.
I agree with you. I think you've given me a lot to mull over and think about in terms of not only how I approach OD, but also how I approach myself learning about OD. I have a lot to think about, and if you're not too opposed to it, I'd be open to having a follow-up call in a week or so.
Make the time.
Well, I appreciate the time that you have given me today. I won't take any more of it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
All
John.
right.
Nice to meet you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.